friends. Pastor Mike with you again. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I have a very special guest. Have wanted to have Britt on with me for a long time. And today's the day we get to talk about a wide range of things they're not just interesting, but they are very important for us to comprehend in this day and age in which we live. So, Britt, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you, brother. Well, I follow your content on Substack and the videos that you put out on a regular basis, pulling from the headlines and explaining things that are going on behind the scenes. And folks, I would encourage you. There is the Substack page that I'm referring to. Go out there and subscribe if you have it in your capacity to do so. I would encourage you to become a paid subscriber. You get bonus content. I think there's a monthly Q&A with Britt and I think your wife's name is Jenny.
It's Jenny.
Yeah. Well worth, folks, well worth the couple of dollars a month. And it does support the ministry. So I know he'd be very, very appreciative of that. You know, when I have somebody like you on, Britt, it's very hard to just focus on something because you're well versed in a wide range of things that are going on today. But let's start. I just saw this the other day. In fact, I saw it when I was watching one of your videos that you put out on the recent U.S.-Japan joint intervention in the foreign exchange market. Now, people read headlines like that. Some people, not all, probably most. They read headlines like that and they just yawn and move on. But there's actually more than meets the eye in this. Could you unpack this a little bit for our viewers?
Sure. This is definitely a much bigger deal than a normal headline we would yawn at, right? So what is happening, really a bird's eye view, is Japan is heading toward a currency crisis due to decades of mismanagement. They had a big property bubble back in the late 1980s, and the central bank started manipulating interest rates, and they started issuing all this government debt for stimulus programs in the past 35 years. And it's put them in a situation where, to put things in perspective, here in the United States, we have $39 trillion in debt. We sit around and go, wow, look at this debt load we have. Well, it's about 120% of GDP. That's bad. Their debt is 260% of GDP. So they're more than twice as worse off as we are. And so the Bank of Japan for years has gone in and it really, this is a Ponzi scheme. You would think of somebody on a street corner in New York trying to pull this over on people. The issuer of their currency goes into the market and buys the Japanese government bonds, the debt that Japan has issued. They just create yen out of thin air and buy these back in order to suppress the interest rates. Because if interest rates were allowed to rise to where the free market would put them, all of their government revenue, tax revenue, would be eaten up by interest on the debt alone, and then some. And no one would buy their debt. They'd have a huge crisis. So they've been suppressing these interest rates for years, and it's put them in a situation where now, really, no matter what road they choose, they've kicked the can down the road for so long that it ends in economic ruin. And Japan is the fourth largest economy in the world. We live in a world where all the major economies are intertwined. We have a global supply chain, as we saw during COVID, as we've seen recently with the crisis in the Middle East. What happens in one part of the world doesn't stay in that part of the world. It affects all of us. And so what's happened is the Japanese yen relative to the dollar, so the exchange rate between those two, it's taken more and more yen to purchase a dollar, to the point where it got up to well over 160 yen per dollar, which was certainly a recent high, like a high we haven't seen in decades.
Yeah.
And so this runs a risk of spiking interest rates, which could cause a crisis in their financial markets. So they've been intervening within that. Now, the problem is compounded by the war in the Middle East, because Japan imports about 97% of their fossil fuels. They don't have a fossil fuel industry. And again, as the fourth largest economy in the world, that's necessary. And so to do that, they have to pay for that oil in dollars, which means they need to be selling yen to buy dollars. And when you sell something, you push the price down. So this is really, it's amplifying this effect of the yen depreciating relative to the dollar. So the United States, from their standpoint, they're looking at this. And one of the things that Japan has had to do, well, they could just print yen, which is going to cause further inflation, or as the largest foreign holder of U.S. treasuries, in other words, U.S. debt, they can sell those U.S. treasuries, get dollars in exchange, and then use those dollars to buy oil. So that's what they've been doing. And since the war in the Middle East broke out, we've seen interest rates on the 10-year U.S. Treasury go from 4% to over 4.7%. And that's important because that's the benchmark by which our rates are set, interest rates are set throughout the domestic economy for things like mortgages and auto loans and credit cards, all these. So it has a direct impact on our economy. So not just in terms of financing debt, because the US government has more annual budget deficits that have to be, you have to create that debt and sell it out into the free market. And so you're doing so at higher interest rates under this scenario. And then you have old debt that's matured that has to be rolled over into new debt at higher interest rates because of what's going on. So they have it's not out of the goodness and kindness of our heart that we've intervened on Japan's behalf. It's because it's a direct threat to our treasury market as well as our domestic economy. And then there's something else at play too. I mentioned before, Japan has artificially suppressed interest rates for decades at this point. And so at one point, they actually had negative interest rates, which I can't wrap my mind around. I don't know exactly how that works. But just think in terms of zero. If you can borrow cash at a 0% interest rate, well, you're probably going to borrow a lot of it. And so what's happened is a lot of people around the world have borrowed yen at this zero or near zero rates. Then they've invested around the world. So for instance, you might sell that yen to buy dollars and then use those dollars to buy the US treasuries that are paying 4.7%. And then you collect that difference. And then hedge funds, all these family offices that are out there, they do that, and they do that with leverage. So 100-fold over. Hey, if we do it 100-fold over, we can make a lot more than 4.7%. And so this is a disaster waiting to happen. It works really well when things are going your way, and when it shifts, it leads to massive selling pressure. So that whole scenario is what they call the yen carry trade. And we're at risk if there's a rapid either appreciation of the yen or depreciation of the yen relative to the dollar, of that ending the yen carry trade. And when you have a reversal like that, where these loans get called in and they say, you need to pay off this loan because your gamble, because that's what it is, your speculation is going the wrong way, then those people that engaged in that trade have to sell the US treasuries or sell the US stocks or sell European stocks or whatever it is that they bought and repay those yen loans, which means now there's super demand for Japanese yen, which makes the Japanese yen appreciate. So it takes fewer and fewer and fewer. But then that leads to more of what we would call margin calls, where now other people engaged in that trade get a call from the person that made that loan saying, okay, you did this because you were counting on the yen, it taking more and more yen, the yen inflating relative to these other currencies. Now it's going the opposite direction. You need to close out this position, and it just feeds on itself. It's a cycle that just feeds on itself. And we saw a little bit of this back almost exactly 2 years ago in August 2024. We saw the yen hit around 160 to the dollar. It rapidly went down to about 140 in the course of about a month. And we saw the largest 2-day sell-off in Japanese stock market history, bigger than 1929, bigger than the 1987 Black Monday crash, bigger than COVID, bigger than the Great Financial Crisis. Huge sell-off. Now, the central banks around the world coordinated and helped diffuse that crisis for a time. But what we're facing now is, when the crisis is a bank needs dollars or a bank needs yen, the central banks can simply create those out of thin air and save that bank. We saw that with Silicon Valley Bank about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
In this case, the crisis is a lack of oil, a lack of gasoline, diesel, liquefied natural gas. Those things cannot be printed by central banks. No executive order from the president is going to make that appear out of thin air. Yeah. And so there's really no way to avert this crisis at this point. It's just a matter of which way is it going to go. But ultimately, one way or another, history tells us that this is going to end in calamity for Japan. Again, the fourth largest economy in the world. That's going to have ripple effects across all global financial markets. No one will be unscathed. There's anywhere estimated between 2 and 4 quadrillion, another thing that's hard to wrap my mind around, quadrillion dollars in derivatives built on top of the global economy. So many people think the stock market or the bond market, those are the biggest financial markets in the world. It's actually the derivatives market. What are derivatives? Well, essentially, they're just bets, speculative bets that are sort of couched as insurance contracts. But you don't, with an insurance contract, I can buy insurance on my house. I can't buy insurance on your house, right? Now, typically, you have to own the underlying asset. With derivatives, you don't. I can speculate on anything. It's really no different than going into a gambling hall and say, well, I'll bet that the next pitch is a ball or a strike in this game. And so we have this happening throughout all of the financial markets. And when this goes wrong, everyone is counting on those derivatives as insurance to insure them against loss. And so it's a big circle, and everybody's looking at the guy on the right and saying, well, if I fail, he'll bail me out. Yeah. And it goes around in a big circle. And so if we have that failure, all the dominoes fall down.
So this really is, Britt, this really is in the classic sense, this is a house of cards that's going to fall.
Yes.
Yeah. And listen, that's not fear mongering, folks. Britt just gave you the best clear-minded, clear-eyed analysis of why and the average American, Britt, they don't pay any attention to those headlines at all. They just even if they glance at it, they don't take the time to, what is this even talking about? And it will impact, when this house of cards comes falling, crashing down, it will impact every American, and every Japanese person. Let me tie China in, because I'm interested in what your take on this is. I read maybe within the last 4, 5, 7 days that China announced that they were going to sell off some U.S. Treasury bonds, and I forget, it was billions of dollars worth of bonds, and I wondered, is that tied to any kind of Because when I look at the Chinese, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions upon them solely, America has a lot of enemies out there, and China is one of them. And of course, we know that they're closely tied to BRICS, and that trying to get a new economic structure and an exchange. We know that they're tied to that. Do you see any connection whatsoever in China's announcement and then followed very closely by this U.S.-Japan announcement? Any relationship there in your mind?
Well, yes, it's a sign of a breakdown in the post-World War II global financial order, the U.S.-dominated global financial order. As you said, now we're seeing this bifurcation where the BRICS nations are trying to assert their authority, their independence from that system. And this has been going on for quite some time. So we've seen a net selling by China and other foreign nations of U.S. treasuries since 2014. And I think this has been accelerated by the Russia-Ukraine war, because what we saw in that was we saw these, whenever any nation does something the United States doesn't like, they immediately jump to sanctions. We're going to institute sanctions. We're going to cut you off from SWIFT, which is part of this US-dominated financial system where you can exchange funds between nations. And they froze Russian assets. And there's been a lot of talk about confiscating those assets and using those to fund Ukraine's rebuilding or fund war against Russia, whatever it may be. So from a self-interest standpoint, every other nation in the world is sitting around thinking, okay, if they'll do that to Russia, what happens if next year or 10 years from now, we're the one they don't like, right? They're going to take our stuff too.
Right.
So we've seen huge buying, record buying, but buying we haven't seen since the late 1960s, which is very relevant. I'll point that out in a moment, of gold by central banks. Why? Well, the largest holding of central banks up until 10 plus years ago was these U.S. treasuries. Because, well, the U.S., we believe, is good for this. They're going to pay this back. Even if the purchasing power of those dollars is a little bit less, they're going to follow through on these things. But now that we know, well, they can freeze these, they can refuse to redeem these, they can confiscate these. Well, if I've got gold in my hand, no one can take that away from me. They can't seize it. It can't be defaulted on. It's not relying on a contract, a contractual obligation that somebody else fulfills. God created it. It's there. It's a basic element of our universe. So we've seen this move toward gold and away from U.S. treasuries. And the reason that's relevant, again, we've seen record levels of central bank buying that we haven't seen since the late 1960s. What happened shortly thereafter? Well, we saw in 1971, August 1971, Richard Nixon closed what they called the gold window, which meant that the dollar was no longer convertible into gold by foreign nations. During World War II, there was a conference held called the Bretton Woods Agreement, and it resulted in the Bretton Woods Agreement, which said that the United States would peg the dollar at a certain weight of gold, and that allied nations would peg their currencies to the dollar. So it effectively put the Western world on a gold standard. Well, the United States had the Vietnam War, all these great society programs, and they spent and spent and spent, and they created more dollar claims on that gold than there was gold. Yes. And other nations were coming along saying, give us our gold. and it was emptying out our gold reserves. So President Nixon put an end to it, and that made the dollar a fiat currency. So that was the end of a monetary system that had ruled for almost 30 years at that point. Well, now we're seeing this record amounts of central bank gold buying in the past several years. That's a signal that they expect the past monetary system that's ruled since then to soon come to an end. And so whether that happens next week or a year from now or 3 years from now, Nobody really knows, but you can be certain that it's going to happen. And of course, our monetary system, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's a debt-based system that requires ever-growing amounts of debt in order to avoid collapse. And so that's why we see constantly debt levels going up, the national debt going up, household balance sheet debt going up, corporate debt going up, because the moment that doesn't happen, it all implodes on itself. It's a feature of the system.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the warning signs of all of this from these different countries and the actions they're taking.
Yeah. Let's bring up the conflict, the U.S.-Iran conflict, and we can't do that without mentioning Israel and what's going on there. I think it was yesterday, Netanyahu publicly, and this is one of the few times that I've seen him do this, but he had said that Israel would never agree to any kind of treaty with Iran or Hamas without a complete disarmament, that they would not withdraw from Lebanon. So this came as no surprise, but President Trump's Board of Peace tried to float this peace deal they have now with Hamas and in Gaza, and Netanyahu came out publicly immediately and said, "Ain't happening here." I'm one of several that I know that have platforms such as yourself that have said that what Trump is doing is not just dangerous, but shows a lack of understanding of the true dynamics of the relationships there between the nation of Israel and her neighbors. So my question here is, what do you see coming out of this as far as the economy of it? Oil is still, they still have a chokehold on oil. China's in desperate need. You've already mentioned Japan imports 97%, which is mind-boggling. So what do you see? What angle is being worked here, in your opinion, Britt, concerning Trump wants peace, and I think he wants peace because he's got greater plans once he's out of office. Folks, maybe they don't understand. He holds the permanent chairmanship seat on this Board of Peace, and so I think he's got a longer range view of the Middle East and what he hopes to accomplish, but there are too many moving parts here. I know this is a long, convoluted question, Brett, so hang with me. Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Pakistan now have made this treaty that I think it's called the Mecca Agreement. All of these moving parts, and here we have President Trump thinking he's going to bring peace, and Israel is saying that ain't happening. Netanyahu saying that ain't happening on my watch. What do you see in the very near future, in the next, let's just say the next 2 years of the Trump administration, in the middle? And I know this is a broad question, so take as much time as you need to unpack it. I don't see it ending well for America. I'll just put it that way. I think we're on the wrong side of reality here, and I can't blame it on Trump's advisors. I lay the blame squarely at President Trump's feet for his inability or unwillingness to understand the dynamics between the nation of Israel and her neighbors, who've made no secret of their intentions toward Israel. So start anywhere you want and answer anything that's come to mind, but I'm really interested in your take on this.
Well, I think you just mentioned exactly why Netanyahu's saying what he's saying, because Israel's neighbors have made no secret of their intentions. It's to wipe out the nation state of Israel and to eliminate the Jewish people in the process. If they can do that, that's what they've said, right? So over and over and over again.
Over and over.
And yet, for some reason, U.S. administration after U.S. administration tries to appease, tries to trade land for, quote, peace. And that's what is being proposed in this Gaza plan. But we've already seen self-governance in Gaza. It led to October 7th.
Yes.
So why would we expect this to be any different?
Right.
I think, as you mentioned, President Trump has a vested personal interest in this board of peace and this governance of Gaza, turning it into this Mediterranean resort, as he's stated in the past. There is cryptocurrency that he has a significant stake in that's involved in what they would use as currency in Gaza as part of this plan. And so it's a little tiny kingdom that he's set up and wants to rule over post-presidency. And this is unprecedented. Patrick Woods talked a lot about this, so I'd recommend, if people want to learn more, checking that out. But where does all of this lead in the next 2 years of the Trump administration? That's unclear to me. I'll speculate in a moment.
Yeah.
I think ultimately where this leads is the Bible tells us in Ezekiel 38, verse 11, that Israel will be at some sort of state of undisturbed, tranquil peace, where they feel they are no longer under threat, leading up to the surprise invasion of Gog of Magog invasion in Ezekiel 38, 39. So one way or another, that's going to come out of all of what we've been seeing. What the timeline is for that and how that happens, I do not know. But what I would speculate how we could see that is what is happening right now. Again, this is really, most Americans are completely unaware of this because they look around and think, well, things are, aren't that different than they were at the beginning of the year. But the Strait of Hormuz since March 1st has effectively been closed. About 95% of what usually travels through the Strait of Hormuz has not traveled, and that's 20% of the world's oil production. Up until last month, probably about a third of that was offset by Saudi Arabia being able to move oil through its east-west pipeline to the port of Yanbu in the Red Sea and ship that out to the rest of the world. Now the Houthis have entered the conflict. And I think just this week, we've seen ships hit both in the Red Sea and in the Persian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz. So ships are under attack. Hardly anything's getting out now. We've seen for months the world depleting its inventories. So we had a lot of commercial inventories. We had strategic petroleum reserves at various nations. Here in the United States, we agreed to tap ours. Well, we're now at below, I think just this week, it went below 300 million barrels. And we may go, well, there's still 300 million left. But according to congressional reports from before the war, that's at or near rock bottom, because we store that strategic petroleum reserve is kept in salt caverns, underground salt caverns, and water is pumped in order to get the oil to rise to the surface. And when you do this, you're diluting, it's eroding the walls. So you run the risk of collapsing the walls of these caverns and making it impossible to refill these at some future point. So we're really coming to the end of this game of pretend. I believe the Trump administration, as well as the Bank of Japan, for the reasons we talked about earlier with the situation that Japan's in and the financial crisis that can ensue, they've been manipulating the oil futures market. Because in spite of all that we've seen, I mean, think about when Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw oil go to $120 a barrel. That was on the threat that 1 million barrels a day of oil would be lost. It ended up being around 200,000 to 300,000 in reality. Now we're seeing 14, 15 million barrels, and now with the closure of the Red Sea, up to 20 million barrels of oil per day. We've seen massive attacks since March. Again, this hasn't been covered very well in the news, but Ukraine has been attacking Russian oil refineries, oil production facilities, oil export facilities. Russia is number 2 behind Saudi Arabia in terms of oil exports. So this puts further pressure on the global oil market, on gasoline supplies, diesel supplies. And so we're seeing, in the midst of all of that, oil's $80 a barrel. That's what they want us to believe.
Yeah.
Even though it did spike to 120 on March 8th. And there was speculation in the media about Scott Bessent going into the futures market. And then they did that morning. They claimed they didn't. But Trump at a press conference said, oil prices are going to go down. We've taken care of that. That was a direct quote. And so we're getting to a point where, yeah, you can trade these pieces of paper and tell people the price is this. But when you run out, either you let the free market assert itself and you get a supply and demand equilibrium that sets the price, or you can say a gallon of gas is $4, but there's not any. Sorry, you don't have, or you can only get a gallon a week, whatever it may be. You have rationing as a result of that. So we're getting to the point where they can't manipulate this any further. We're just going to run out. And this creates a big problem for President Trump, because back in June, when they were signing the Memorandum of Understanding, he gave a press conference and he said, well, we had to do this. We were running out of oil. He said the world had 4 weeks left of oil reserves. He said, I don't want to become Herbert Hoover, because he understands where all of this leads. If the oil does not flow again, the global economy its growth is directly correlated with energy used, and the dominant energy source is fossil fuels. And if you take 10 to 15% of the world's fossil fuels offline, you cannot have a growing economy. Post-World War II, there's only been 2 times where the global economy has contracted, and that is the Great Financial Crisis and the pandemic shutdowns. And those were very brief. Here, it would be much worse than that. And that means collapsing financial markets. It all just feeds on itself. You're looking at the Great Depression. And that's why he used that language. I don't want to be Herbert Hoover. Wasn't a great guy. He didn't go down in history as a great guy. I don't want to be Herbert Hoover. Well, now we're heading in that direction, because there's no sign that we're going to be able to have an exit from this crisis before we get to that point. And this doesn't end well for the Trump administration. It does not end well for America. I believe it's the end of the post-World War II U.S.-dominated global and financial military order. Yeah. Because predicated on that, we saw this in the 19th century. The 19th century, the British Empire was all over the world. The Royal Navy ruled the high seas. They facilitated international trade. And as a result, the world's reserve currency was the British pound, and the center of international finance was London. And that enabled them to finance this Royal Navy that went all over the world.
Yep.
Post-World War I, they lost that position. It took until the Suez Canal crisis, I think, for them to realize that. But the baton was passed to the United States. So post-World War II, it was the U.S. Navy that ruled the high seas, the U.S. military that had bases all over the world and facilitated international trade, made waterways freely navigable for trade. And as a result, the world said, well, we're going to use the dollar. The dollar became the world's dominant reserve currency, dominant trade currency.
Yeah.
Center of finance moved from London to New York. And we saw post Nixon closing that gold window. Well, now there's nothing underpinning the dollar. It's just this fiat currency. We could have massive inflation. Well, Henry Kissinger came in and said, well, we're going to tie it to oil. We'll make a deal with Saudi Arabia that we will be their protector, We will defend them against outside enemies in exchange for they will only sell their oil for dollars. And that deal was made with OPEC as a whole, essentially. So oil became traded in dollars. So anyone that wanted oil, which is the whole world, had to buy dollars. So it created a floor of demand for dollars.
Yes.
And this is why we saw Operation Desert Storm and Operation Desert Shield back in 1990-91. There was a threat that Saddam Hussein would invade Saudi Arabia. So we came to their defense. Well, now we're seeing a breakdown in that order. So starting in late 2023, the Houthis were attacking shipping in the Red Sea. And the U.S. Navy said, we're going to have Operation Prosperity Guardian. We have 20 allies. We're going to go take care of this Houthi threat. We're going to neutralize it. We're going to make the Red Sea safe again. They failed in doing that. There are almost 1,000 airstrikes carried out under the Biden administration. Then Trump ran for office, said, Biden's weak. I'll take care of it. He came in March 2025. He bombed the Houthis. It did not work. Traffic in the Red Sea remained down 60% from 2022 levels going into just last month when they started attacking shipping again. So I'm sure it's down even more at this point. But this showed the world that the United States no longer has the conventional capability to counter those threats. They could not reopen that waterway the same way the failed British Empire could not take back the Suez Canal and the Suez Canal crisis in 1956. So now we have this happening again in the Strait of Hormuz. So we have Iran is attacking shipping, and there is nothing the United States can do. They've threatened, they've bombed. Now, the United States could end this threat by taking the land from which these threats are coming. They would have to invade. They would have to occupy Iran. Don't know that Trump has that political capital to do that. Maybe he'll make that case to the nation and tell them what's at stake. But if there's a failure to do that, and the Strait of Hormuz is simply ceded to Iran, now all these other nations in the Gulf are going to say, the United States can't protect us. Who can? Well, China and Russia could probably hold Iran in line, and China and Russia will say, we'll be happy to do that. Stop selling your oil in dollars. Sell it in these other currencies, and then you can trade those currencies for gold. And then this demand for dollars just disappears, and we have massive inflation. They all come back home. The United States then no longer has the ability to finance this projection of military power around the globe. And without that, again, it's a symbiotic relationship that completely breaks down and ends the post-World War II financial and military power and influence the United States has enjoyed. And so, and that's exactly what the Bible tells us, because we don't read about the United States being a player, not just a major player, but a player at all in the events of the end times, in the Ezekiel 38-39, Gog and Magog invasion. People have said, well, why don't they come to the defense of Israel? And we're certainly seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. We're seeing anti-Israel sentiment throughout our politics. But it also could be that we do not have the capability. That's right. I think people have overlooked that. It looks like we're losing that capability in real time right before our eyes. And most people still think, well, the United States is the mighty superpower from 30 years ago that nobody will mess with. I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So friends, listen, you just received a thorough yet concise geopolitical analysis of what's really going on. You're not going to read this in the headlines and in the articles that are out there. Britt does this on a daily basis, folks. So again, I encourage you to go to his Substack page and subscribe there. If you have the capacity, support his work financially, because it is very good work. Before we have to go, Britt, you mentioned Patrick Wood, a mutual friend of ours. He does excellent work. Technocracy News is his website. He posts there daily, as well as other staff members. I would encourage you to follow that page, Patrick Wood. So one other topic I want to cover with you, Brett, is the continued push for digital ID. And as I'm watching this and all of the theater with the SAVE Act and who's on board and who isn't, and it becomes almost comical at some point. I think we're there. But everything, digital IDs are being sought. Trump is behind this effort, and I think they're trying to couch it within the language of the SAVE Act as a way to ensure elections. We've heard that, and I think there's some truth to that. But there's more going on there than just digital IDs to protect our elections. I think that it's part and parcel of this coming, I call it, you call it, the beast system, this control matrix that's being constructed right in front of our eyes. What's your take on that, Brett? Where do you see that at? Is there anything that we can do to stop any of these things, or is it just an eventuality that we can't stop it?
Well, we should fight against it. I don't know that there's anything we can do to stop it. I mean, the Bible tells us this beast system's coming.
Yeah.
But as far as digital ID, as an example, so a little over a year ago, I believe it was, TSA said, we're going to start at airports here in the United States taking people's pictures just to make sure. We just check them and then we delete them, right? We don't say, and I'm like, what are you checking them against? Like, what? Yeah, I don't believe you, right?
Right.
And they had a group of 6 bipartisan senators headed by Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren. All right, so I can't think of 2 senators different.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren. And they held hands and united against this and said, we didn't pass this legislation. Why are you doing this? This creates a global ID. It creates a global surveillance state when you're taking pictures of all the travelers. We still have it.
Yeah.
In fact, it's still moving forward. So if they can't stop that, what am I going to do? Right. So, and we're seeing this all over the world. So we've seen, the last I checked, it was 14 states had rolled out digital driver's license, digital ID, the equivalent to driver's license. We've seen the United Nations propose digital ID passports, global passports to fly anywhere on any flight. We saw earlier in the year announcement that TSA, well, it's only for certain travelers that are foreign travelers coming to the United States for 90 days or less who meet these other criteria. We're going to take samples of their DNA, right? And that just sort of went under the radar and nobody raised a protest. Well, it's only on these people, right? Until it's on the next group of people.
That's right.
Next group of people, until it's everybody.
Yeah.
And if you have no problem with, well, these are foreigners, we got to keep track of these foreigners, right? Okay, well, whenever you travel to another country, you're a foreigner. Is it okay if they collect your DNA? Are you cool with that, right? So that's what's coming. That's what's coming, and it's the slow creep, and people miss it. The other way they're going after this is we've seen this in Australia, we've seen proposals in the United Kingdom, and here in the United States is, well, the internet and social media can be very damaging to children. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't, and nobody under the age of 12 or 14 or 16 or whatever age they set in these different countries should be able to access social media. So we need to make sure, and the way of course, the way they make sure is biometrically, because you can't just ask people, hey, are you this age? Well, sure I am, right? So we're going to have to scan your face at the very least, maybe even your eyeballs or a fingerprint or something to prove who the age you are. And people go, yeah, that's right. We need to protect the children. And they never say, well, isn't this the parents' responsibility to protect the children from getting on the internet? But they couch it in that language, protect the children. And then people go, yeah, I'm for protecting the children.
Yes.
But it never occurs to them, okay, if the 12-year-old has to prove they're 18 or older, then anybody 18 or older has to prove they're not 12. That means everybody that gets on the internet has to prove they're the age they say they are.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the only way you can do that is through some sort of biometric marker and some sort of digital ID. You have to have your license, your credentials uploaded somewhere and associated with your face, your retina, your fingerprint, and then that will be used to access. So we saw Nikki Haley actually propose this in the primaries here in the United States in 2024. And she actually said the founding fathers didn't intend for people to be able to post things anonymously, right? And I'm like, well, the founding fathers, some of them authored, the Federalist Papers, which were posted under pseudonyms and anonymously. So, but regardless, that's where they want to go with this. Oh, we want to make sure we know. We saw that post you put on social media, and we know you're the one that did it.
Yes,
and so your access to the internet is cut off, or your access to your currency is cut off, or your access to your retirement portfolio is cut off, because they want to put all of this stuff on the blockchain, digitize all of this stuff. And it creates a digital system of tyranny.
Yes.
That I like to say it's not the mark of the beast, because we're not in the tribulation.
That's
the Antichrist and the false prophet are not putting this into effect, but it's indistinguishable in capability and function from the mark of the beast.
That's right.
Meaning it can be used to cut off your ability to buy and sell, which is exactly what we read in Revelation chapter 13. Yes. So we're seeing the system that I believe will be adopted and turned into the mark of the beast during the tribulation. We're seeing it built right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And most people not only aren't opposing it, but we see people embracing it with glee. I mean, you can look on YouTube and TikTok and all these other social media channels where people will go and they'll use Amazon Palm Pay for the first time, and they'll wave their palm and they'll go, I just bought my groceries. How cool. I didn't have to get cash out, or I didn't have to swipe my credit card. Those things take precious seconds. Yeah. I saved like 17 seconds by doing that. Isn't that great? And it doesn't occur to them at all. All my freedom and liberty is gone.
Yes.
When I get dependent on this, because that palm sway that works now identifies me specifically, and that same system that just allowed me to buy my groceries can cut me off at any time.
Yes.
And we're seeing them push this in airports too for digital IDs. They say, well, if you sign up for the retinal scan, then you can walk right through the line. If not, you're going to have to go through this procedure that, of course, we're not going to say this publicly, but we're going to make it really long and onerous, right? So that you choose the most convenient way. You're going to go, I'm tired of dealing with this. I don't want to stand in line for 2 hours, or I can't stand in line for 2 hours. I got a connecting flight. Just scan my eyeballs and I'll go. Yeah. And that's how we end up. Once they get enough people in that system, they can force the holdouts to be in that system. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then there's no escape from that system.
Yeah, exactly right. So I'm listening to your response, Brett, and I'm reminded of 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, where the Apostle Paul says that while they are clamoring for peace and safety, sudden destruction will come upon them. So we're seeing this system, as you pointed out, being built. We're seeing people celebrating it. They don't understand what's happening, so they're celebrating the construction and the rise of this control. matrix, and that is their sole focus, peace and safety. If you'll promise me that, I'll do anything. And what happens as a result? Sudden destruction. That's coming. I believe that's a tribulation, day of the Lord context there. That's coming. Britt, we could go on, and we were actually joking about this before we went on the air, but we could go on for a couple of hours, and that's not a wise thing to do in our current environment. People like shorter snippets, and brother, I've really appreciated your responses and your thoughts and your insights. And again, folks, I would encourage you to go to Britt's Substack page. There it is, at Britt Gillette. I know you're on other social media, but you're not active there. So this is the place where you want to keep up. If you have it in your capacity to do so, I would encourage you to subscribe financially and get, insider reports and conversations, well worth your support, folks. So Britt, thank you again very much for taking time to join me today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, folks, that's all we have for you today here on Soaring Eagle TV. Please share this with your friends, neighbors, co-workers, family. Post it on your platforms and get the information out there. This was a very, very in-depth yet concise and on-point conversation about things that really are going on. The headlines are quite often misleading. There's more to the story than meets the eye, as Paul Harvey used to say. And for you younger folks, if you don't know who Paul Harvey is, go look it up in whatever browser you use. You'll be surprised. And if I remembered his classic, and I don't, if I were the devil, this is what I would do. Something like that. Go look up that monologue that he gave, and I think that describes what's going on in our world today. Anyway, love you guys. Appreciate you. God bless you. See you next time.